This presentation is on weathering and mass movement. We're going to be focusing on the CSEC objectives, define weathering, describe the processes of weathering, and explain the processes of mass movement. Now, this video will center around the concept of weathering and concepts relating to weathering and the types of weathering. Now let's begin with this concept known as denudation. If you notice what is taking place here, we have rainfall resulting in rocks and soil being washed down slope. Now this process, denudation, is referred to as the wearing away of the Earth's surface by weathering, mass wasting, erosion, and transport. So denudation includes all these processes: weathering, mass wasting, erosion, and the transport. Now, what specifically is weathering? Now, this is where rocks break down due to exposure to the impacts of weather, right? Weather conditions, whether it be rain, whether it be ice, and so on. Now, where materials from the land have been removed by wind, gravity, and ice, the process is known as erosion. And we see a lot of this taking place in Jamaica, where hillsides and so on have been eroded. Recently, with the heavy rainfall, we find that there have been landslides and so on. And this is a process known as erosion. Now, if you notice in the picture here, there are sand deposits along the coast. Yes, deposits. So when we talk about deposition, this refers to the dropping of materials which have been picked up and transported by wind, water, or ice. And in this case, the sea has transported materials such as sand and deposited them here. Now, the concept of mass wasting, mass movement, as depicted by the photograph, we have soil and rock particles being removed from the land. Now, this is what mass movement is all about. It is also known as mass wasting, the movement of rock fragments and soil downslope under the influence of gravity. Now, the materials that have been weathered, they are called regolith. Now let us look at the different types of weathering. There are three main types of weathering. We have physical weathering, chemical weathering, and biological weathering. Now, physical weathering, we are going to be focusing on these three processes of physical weathering: frost action, pressure release, and temperature change. Chemical weathering, we are going to be looking at oxidation, solution, and carbonation. And for biological weathering, we are going to look at how plants and animals influence the breakdown of rocks. Remember that weathering refers to the breakdown of rocks. So what we're saying here, based on these types of weathering, is that rocks can be broken down physically, chemically, and biologically. Now, what do we mean by physical weathering? This is where the rock basically breaks down from a large block into smaller pieces without chemical change or without the influence of plants and animals. So this is what we refer to as physical weathering. Another term for physical weathering is mechanical weathering. It's a physical breakdown of rock into smaller pieces without any change in the mineral or chemical composition of that rock. Now we are focusing first on frost action, then we'll go to pressure release, and next temperature change. Now, what is this frost action freeze thaw method of physical weathering? Now, as the name suggests, or as the title suggests, it involves ice, right? Thawing, ice melting, water freezing. So what we're saying is this type of physical weathering can only take place in areas where the temperature fluctuates around 0 degrees Celsius. So this would not happen in the Caribbean since we don't have our temperatures fluctuating around zero, where water would basically freeze. So let us look at the first bullet point. It occurs where temperature fluctuates around 0 degrees Celsius. Water may find its way into cracks and joints in the rock when the temperature rises above freezing. So we're expecting here now that above freezing the water is now, the state of the water is basically liquid. Now when the temperature dips below 0 degrees Celsius, the water freezes. Now when water freezes, it expands and exerts pressure on the joint, widening the crack or widening that joint. When this process is repeated over and over, the pressure exerted by the ice eventually causes the rock to break up. And this is what we call frost action, as it results in the physical breakdown of rock. Now, this diagram here depicts the freeze-thaw or frost action process. So water is collected in the joint. I want you to take a note of the size or the width of this joint here in this rock. The water freezes. The top part freezes first, then the bottom. The water freezes, so therefore we have an expansion because pressure is now exerted on this joint. Repeatedly, this process will eventually cause rocks to physically break down into smaller pieces. Now let us look at the process of pressure release. As the name suggests, something has been removed to ease some pressure. Now, this occurs where overlying material is removed by erosion, exposing underlying rock. The release of the pressure causes the rock to expand. It's as if someone sits on you for a period of time, maybe you're in a bus, and as soon as that person gets up, that release of or relief of that pressure, you just want to spread out. And that is what happens with underlying rock. This expansion causes fractures to form parallel to rock surface, which causes the rock to develop several layers which are similar to the layers of an onion. Now, repeat over time, these sheets of rock will break away from the original rock mass. Now, the peeling away of these sheets of rock, the concept exfoliation takes place, or the process of exfoliation takes place right here, which is where layers of material are peeled off from its original surface, similar to that of an onion. So in pressure release, there is removal of overlying material by erosion, which causes a sudden expansion of the underlying material, which eventually causes it to sections or layers to peel away until eventually the rock breaks up. This diagram is depicting just that. So this gray area was removed by erosion, so the underlying layer basically is now forced to expand or pushes up, and then the rocks begin to fracture until eventually it breaks up. Now, temperature change or final process on the physical weathering. As the name suggests, there is a change in temperature, and this is not just a mild change, it's a significant change in temperature. A fact known about deserts is that it has a high degree of temperature change where it is very cold at night and very, very hot during the day. So there's a significant variation or temperature range. Now, during the day, the high temperatures will cause the rocks to expand slightly. When we are hot, we tend to want to spread out, and that is what happens with the rock. During the day, the rocks will expand because of the heat. However, during the night, the low temperature in the desert causes the rock to contract slightly. And that is exactly what we do as humans when we are cold. We try to snuggle up. So the rocks will contract due to the lower temperature at night. Now, the repeated expansion and contraction with temperature changes between day and night eventually cause the rocks to fall apart, breaking them down physically. And that is how temperature change results in the breakdown of rock. All right, this picture here shows what happens when there is a significant difference in temperature in the desert, this is what happens to the rock.